Hello, everyone, and welcome to InvenTank, the show for inventors where I'm joined by a special guest host each and every week for some fun conversation and to help answer all your burning invention questions. I'm your host, Lisa Lloyd, and we're streaming live today on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn, or you may be catching the replay on Pandora, iHeart, or Amazon Music. InvenTank is made possible by the Invention Accelerator, helping inventors to cut the painful learning curve and invent wow products, protect them properly, and get in front of the right people at the right companies to pitch like a pro for license. In a moment, we'll begin taking questions, so feel free to drop them in the comments at any time. Today, I'd like to introduce you to my special guest host, Chris Harden, fellow Shark Tank alum and co-founder of TROBO, the storytelling robot. So not only will we get to hear about Chris's experience on Shark Tank today, but his education and career in electrical engineering and industrial design will also provide some valuable insights for whatever technology, which we don't have the privilege of getting to talk to you about too much on this program. So today's your day, folks, if you've got an app or something like that you want to talk about, or design hurdles that you may be facing. He's responsible for managing many cutting-edge products, including Ford's MyTouch system, Coke's Freestyle machine, the first Kindle Fire PDF support, and so much more. So with that, thank you so much, Chris, for joining me here today.
Hi, Lisa. It's nice to be here. Thank you for having me.
I know that there were some scheduling conflicts, and you really made it happen for me. And so I personally want to thank you for all of us. We really appreciate having you here. So I thought we'd do something a little fun. I'm going to start off by playing the pitch part of your pitch at Shark Tank. Okay. And then I thought maybe we could just kind of talk a little bit about those objections and what it's like standing up to those, because I think there's a lot that can be learned from those, whether they're questions or objections from the sharks or any investors at all going forward. Sound good?
That sounds great.
All right, so I've got y'all queued up here. This is not always super easy to do, so give me 2 seconds. Oops, wrong one. That's my fault. There we go. All right.
Hello, Sharks. My name is Chris Harden.
And I'm Jeremy Scheinberg, and we're the creators of TROBO, the storytelling robot from Orlando, Florida. We're seeking $100,000 in exchange for 10% of our company. How many times have you heard a stuffed toy repeat the same mindless phrases over and over and over again? And it ends up at the bottom of that toy box after 2 weeks, never to be played with again.
Well, not anymore. Introducing TROBOs. TROBOs are wirelessly connected, cuddly toys that read stories about science and math to children using tablets and phones. Children not only read along, but they also interact with questions and puzzles along the way.
The stories are personalized, and the TROBO even calls your child by name. We go one step further, we're actually putting the child right into the story. The child builds an avatar within the app and quickly becomes the main character.
Okay, David, time to come on down and meet your new best friend, Newton.
Yes.
Your adventure today on the TV here is What Do Sharks Eat? Have a seat right here.
Good luck getting up out of that stool.
You turn around to the sharks if you like. Here's your pal. Isn't he sweet? Hit the right arrow to get started.
Damon, did you know some sharks will eat anything? This poor shark has a tummy ache from all the trash she's eaten. Help her feel better by dragging all the items from her tummy to the garbage can.
Okay, right over. Perfect. He's doing great, isn't he?
Can I keep this?
You can. You have to complete the puzzle to move forward.
All right, take a little sip before you.
All right, that was awesome. So, stop share. There we go. Chris, you guys did a good job. I don't know how nervous you were going out there, but I had to take a lot of deep breaths and really kind of calm my nerves because I felt like I was about to have a panic attack. And the engineers or the producers just asked me to change my offer right before I walked out.
Wow.
Yeah. And we'll talk more about that in a minute also. But you got some really interesting questions and objections. Was there anything in particular that was an aha moment or a pivotal moment for you that really stands out when you think back on it?
On the actual moment itself, the objections we had pretty much seen, most of them we had seen before the pricing one, which is what Mr. Wonderful surfaced, came up a lot. And honestly, it was one of the biggest challenges for us as a company Basically, what he described was that it's a plush toy. It's got to be $25 or less, or you can't sell it. And that is kind of true even still today. When I launch a new product, I try to hit $25 or below because it's a gift price. So the challenge for us was that this is a very expensive product to make. The software is pricey. There's hardware inside. And Lee says, you know, if you want to sell something at retail, it has to be built at least 1/4 of the price of retail, because there's multiples that get to, everyone in the value chain has to get their cut so they can make money and survive. So to get down to $25 would be a ridiculously small amount of money unless you're in a high volume. And we were just not at high volumes yet. So he was saying, hey, you got to get below 25, and we were at 60. And that actually was tough for us even during the airing of the show. Customers who came to look at the product saw that $60 price tag, and they said, hey, this is, Mr. Wonderful said it's supposed to be super cheap. Why is it not cheap? And it's because we couldn't possibly sell them at that price and volume and make money.
Do you think that there's anything you could have done differently in your pitch to have either avoided or evaded that particular objection?
No, actually, what I think we would have done better is the night of the airing, offered a discount to get down to 25 and just deal with the fact that we weren't going to make margin on those units. That would have been wise, because I think what surprised both Jeremy, which is the co-founder, and myself, is that people took Mr. Wonderful's advice as gospel, and they expected us to follow that to the letter when they went to the website, and we didn't. And several people just complained about that. So it would have been wise to have played ball with Mr. Wonderful's advice.
I have a frog in my throat. Sorry. So I can completely relate. When I was on, I had a stuffed animal also. Treasure Chest Pets, which had secret compartments inside, for those who haven't seen it. And Mr. Wonderful was the first one to go out for, well, actually, no, Kevin Harrington was, which is fine. But then he was with, he said, if I went back into the toy business, I'd have nightmares, is what he said. So he just, as a general rule, anybody who dreams about being on the show, that's not going to be your partner. But he said some numbers, dropped some numbers that weren't accurate. And who am I on this show that they're recording that I'm going to sit here and argue with him on? And what a lot of people may not realize is that, I don't know how long you were there. I was there for 45 minutes, cut down to 12. How long?
Yeah, 45 minutes. Yeah.
About 45 minutes. Yep. So, there's a lot of other conversation that goes on. And he was saying that, the business is this big and you only get this much of a piece of it. So you can only make this much money, and it's just a nightmare. I think yours isn't as much a toy as it is a STEM product, right? Seth, so you talked about science and math specifically as an education. So tell us a little bit more about what the product really served in your mind's eye when you invented it. What were you trying to do? That's
a great question. You also touch on market positioning, which I think is a great topic too.
Yeah.
So we started out with the idea of making a full-fledged robot for teaching kids how to program. Like, we went through a startup weekend, which is oftentimes where these things will take seed. But the finances necessary to actually create a platform to teach programming are really high. So there's a huge barrier to entry. And in the end, both Jeremy and myself were engineers, and we come from theme parks. So we have this mix of storytelling and tech, and we shaped TROBO into something that could teach and hopefully inspire young children to be engineers in the future, or take some sort of technical path. And at the time, and I'm not sure about it these days, I'm assuming it's the same situation, the US, China, we're seeing a really small number of engineers coming out to meet the need in the marketplace. So like many folks at that time, we were trying to figure out how to get more engineers into the pool. And, just like McDonald's, you get them when they're young. You teach the children as soon as possible that engineering even exists. Because I didn't know about engineering until I hit college. So, and that's just my own background. Jeremy knew he wanted to be a theme park engineer when he was a kid. So the idea is just to more broadly expose children to these technical backgrounds and hopefully inspire them to become some sort of technical leader in the future. And how does how do you think the app combined with the plushie is going to help do that? So it really allowed us to make a lot more content. The problem with plush when they ship is they usually have a little small chip, a little bit of storage, and it can only play 1 to 7, 10 sounds. And it's usually poor quality. So by combining the app with a way to get the audio inside the doll, it enables us to have a platform to put more and more content over the years and expand the content library without having to remanufacture things inside the doll.
So did they cut out from the show any more of your explanation about how important the math and science learning was for the sale of this product versus just the toy? Because I felt like they focused on it being a stuffed animal with a speaker box in it, as opposed to really getting that learning engagement experience story out of it. How did they miss that?
It's interesting you say that, because they are a different target audience, and it's a different kind of sales engagement, as you know, Lisa, when you're working with investors than it is with like your target audience. For us, we have a product. This is oftentimes in anything related to children, is you're trying to make a product that serves children and the parents who are going to buy. One's the interested buyer, one's the economic buyer. For investors, they're not so interested unless they want some sort of personal inspiration from what you're doing. They're not so interested in the vision of the product in terms of what it inspires. They want to know how the thing is going to scale, how it's going to be sustainable and make money for them. So our conversation with them was focused more on unit sales, margins, how can we scale this, and also what was discussed is reskinning it, because it is a platform that could have been reskinned for Shrek or other ones that came up during the conversation. And so our conversation with them was a lot different than it would be directly to the target audience.
So you didn't really talk as much about that engagement.
Correct.
Or the science behind that. Do you think in hindsight that would have made any kind of a difference?
Not really.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Hi, TROBO. Thanks for joining us. And if you're just joining us, please feel free to drop your questions and say a hi in the chat. Of course, you're not required to, but we love knowing that you're out there. We've had some technical issues with a couple of the platforms. So if I don't see it, if I don't respond to you, it's only because I don't see it. All right. So the reason I asked that question is because now I've been in sales. You're the tech guy. I'm the salesperson. So we've got these two different mindsets, and the melting of them too is that sweet spot, right?
Yes.
Understanding the margins and all of those things. Yes, the data has to support the business decision. But I always say to folks who are new to sales, the selling process, people buy on emotion and justify with logic. So anytime you can engage them and first sell them on the joy of the experience, and then support that with the data, the number, the margins, and all of that other stuff, the technology, the fact that you know what tolerances are, for example, or ship weights need to be, or what dimensions, whatever, all of the science side of it, then helps people feel smart about that emotional decision that they just made, right? Oh, hi, Brent. Hi, Wendy. Thanks for joining. So where is the company now?
So actually, we dissolved TROBO probably 5 years ago now. So
Okay.
what is interesting, there's some interesting learning lessons we had from TROBO that I'll share with you today after Shark Tank was over.
Yeah, please.
So after the show aired, about a year after we filmed it, as you know, Lisa, it's not live.
Right.
And we filmed that summer, we aired that April the next year. And then the following 2 quarters, as we were selling out the rest of our initial order, which was 2,000 units, we were looking for investors, and we're in the Orlando area. So we were mainly talking to investors in Orlando. We also flew out to California and met with an investor out of China. And the challenge we had was convincing investors that they could scale this thing 10x, because it's always kind of the litmus test is, can I actually scale this business 10x? Whether it actually comes to fruition or not, if you make 5x, it's still a good investment. So the common challenge we had in taking this indention and getting it into a spot where we could go to the next level, we took it to market, direct to consumer, and that was all well and good, and Shark Tank certainly helped with sales. But getting it to the next level so that we could reduce our own personal financial risk was not trivial. And what happened was the investors said, oh, they saw this ability to scale in software, and they thought they're going to make all the money in software. But really, Apple and the $1 commodity market where everything costs $1 on the Apple store basically showed that the mathematics for the model, the business model, weren't going to scale to 10x. The real money was in selling of the dolls. And so with that in mind, we went through several rounds of trying to raise further seed funding past what we had already gotten, and we couldn't get enough to get it to the next level. So we closed it down and took about a year to sell out the rest of the units that following Christmas. And now Jeremy's gone back to his world in theme parks, and I'm back in game development.
So maybe I should have asked this first. Now, on the show, you did get an offer.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about the offer.
Yes, so Robert Herjavec gave us what's called a handshake deal. So in the show, when they come down, they accept your offer. It's a commitment, but it's not a legal binding agreement. It is, I am vested in you. We're going to make this work. And so then our teams start talking to each other to see if we can make a deal in what's called due diligence. So Herjavec's team was excellent for us. They helped us actually do some marketing while they were working with us and make some decisions on product. But it took us about, I think, from that airing date, which is sometime late that summer, through December, to go through due diligence and then decide to part ways. So we actually did not close the deal. Robert had a reason.
Because the offer that Robert made you was contingent on getting a licensing deal anyway. So why would there be any due diligence? Put it in front of, he mentioned DreamWorks, right?
Yeah.
Put it in front of DreamWorks, let DreamWorks say no, and then go not do the deal with you. I mean, it's that simple.
Well, it would be nice to be that simple, but as you know, it's never that simple. Right.
Right.
It turned out, in addition to the deal with Robert, we also had some other opportunities with grants that were coming our way because it was a STEM product. And it just got complicated in comparing what we wanted and what he wanted with his terms, and we couldn't match up. There were like three things that kept us from lining up, one from him and two from us. And in the end, it really is like getting married when you bring an investor on or a partner. And if it's just not going to work, even though it is a big loss, it's better to say no than move ahead. So we very respectfully decided to part ways, and we did not make that deal. And so by the time we got to the April airing, it was already done.
So what would you say is your biggest takeaway for our current inventors, our listeners who are participating today and maybe catching us on a replay? If there's the one thing you want them to take away from your learning in their invention journey, what would that be?
Wow, just the one thing. Oh my goodness.
I know. I'm having because I'm sure there's a long list for you.
there is, but I can say that depending on where you want, what a success means for you, this will guide what your biggest learning is. But if success for you is turning your invention into a real business that can either support you as a sole business owner, or if you want to scale it to a business that can support many, you need to learn how big the problem is that you are trying to solve and decide whether or not that problem is big enough to sustain a business around it. And if you don't think that the problem you're solving is big enough, it might be worth investing in a different solution to a different problem that will be big enough for you 5 or 10 years down the line.
Standing ovation from me. Yes. Is it a big enough pain for enough people is usually the way I say it, but same exact thing. Yeah. Do you have any process or steps that you can share that you have learned over the years are the best way to fail early and learn the answers to those questions about the demand?
Absolutely. I think this taps into something you and I had discussed earlier about being an inventor versus an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
With as I mentioned to you offline, Lisa, I've been a lifelong inventor. As an engineer, you kind of tinker and you make something. It's so much fun to make. I love making things.
Yep. The
hard part is selling for me. So, for what that's worth,
we should partner.
So, convincing myself to stop building the invention and do some market testing early, and then mainly around pricing. Do people actually care about your idea before you put all this time into it? And then what would they pay for it? Once you get a sense of what your target audience will be willing to pay for, then you can run an Excel spreadsheet and generate sales numbers. That is a whole piece of savvy a lot of people don't have on their own. Mm-hmm. But if you can invest in yourself to learn how to take an Excel spreadsheet and just do some basic projections over 1 or 2 or 3 years, you can get a sense of how much money you're going to be able to make and whether it is a big enough problem, as I mentioned earlier. But for me, it took me till my mid-30s to quit creating and force myself to think about do people want this thing that I'm creating? I
It
know they
sounds so
want to pay
obvious,
for
right?
it.
I
How's
know
that?
it sounds obvious, but then
Oh,
it's
yeah.
just not when
It's not, and
you're
it's
so
not easy.
passionate and excited about the idea.
Yeah. Actually forcing myself to sit aside and manage the business side is not easy for me. I know what I need to do. I've done it a lot, but making myself doing it where I could go over here and invent to make the product just a little bit better, it's knowing and doing, right? Once you have to know what to do, and then you have to force yourself to do it. And those are big steps.
Right on. And they're big learning curves. So for me with TC Pets, I kept thinking, I just shot a video on this too. I kept thinking if I just had the money to hire the right people, I just need money, then I can make this work. That like I could buy myself more runway. The reality is all I was buying was more opportunities to fail because what I needed was knowledge.
Yeah.
All the money in the world I was just going to blow through, which is exactly what happened, and burn out on that learning curve in the process. Eventually, I guess with $1 million, I probably would have spent that the wrong way too, though, truthfully. I mean, the money should come after you know what to do with it, not before, in other words, right?
That's interesting you say that. I've heard, and I can't quote the particular person who said it, some sort of business mogul type that said, companies that are rich in cash are often more wasteful and they struggle than companies that don't have the cash and have to focus their resources. Right. But I'll share something with you. If I had that kind of cash, I would also hire, but you have to be careful about who you hire because you don't know. But there's ways to scale and ways to overcome the learning curve. And there are these, four, in my mind, the four major pieces of what you need to take a product to market. And those four pieces can be handled by 4 people in a team. Or if you're going to do it yourself, okay, then you're just signing yourself up for these learning curves as you described them. And therefore, you're going to take longer to get to market.
Right.
So either one, you're going to want on the farthest side, you're going to want all the control in your business. And it's just you. And you're going to learn everything along the way. And you're going to struggle and you're going to fail. And you're not going to be as good as someone who's already done it a few times. Or if you scale and you have 2 people, 3 people, or 4 people, whatever people you trust and what domains they bring to the table to complement yours, then you can move a little faster. But unless you cover all those domains, either with cash or with partners,
right,
you're going to be on learning curves the whole time while you're trying to figure it out. And you're going to be slow.
And it creates so much. I think entrepreneurs and inventors severely underestimate what stress does to your creativity and to your ability to push through, because at some point you become so emotionally exhausted. Yeah. It becomes and you even start to second guess yourself on things that you do know to be true, that you have already learned. You start to wonder if you know anything anymore. I don't know. That's what I went through. How about you?
Yeah, it happens. It happens. In fact, right now, as I mentioned to you, I'm getting ready to launch a new product in the fall, and I'm relearning Facebook advertising and analytics and landing pages and relearning what it means to be on Kickstarter now, because it's different than it was when we launched TROBO. And with recent changes on Apple closing down some of their the ability for companies like Facebook to advertise well, I'm learning that what used to work doesn't work. And so I'm second guessing myself, and I worry that I can't get where I need to be in terms of sales before I kick off. So it's really stressful, and
yet you're doing it again anyway. Yeah. Welcome to the world of entrepreneurship. Yeah. I often joke there should be a 12-step program for recovering entrepreneurs.
I like it. That's terrific.
Step 1, get around other people who understand your pain.
You say that. I remember my early 30s. I had already been inventing in my 20s, but most of the people I was around didn't invent. They weren't tinkerers. And I remember sort of having a moment of personal crisis. That's a little hyperbolic, but I really I sat down one day and I said, how come none of my friends are doing this? Why don't they want to do this? And it was frustrating and it felt lonely. Yeah. But in Orlando, which is where I'm from, when Jeremy and I started with TROBO, it was this groundswell of inventors, entrepreneurs, building, incubators and co-working spaces, and Orlando was getting involved. And if you are alone, find a community. They are out there, and all of them want to do the same thing. They want to make you successful. They want to make them successful. You don't have to do this stuff alone. There are a lot of people who will help you get there. And if you don't know that they exist, start looking at meetup.com and LinkedIn, and you can find these groups that you can be a part of, and it will propel you psychologically. It'll propel you.
So good. So true. And you mentioned incubators and accelerators. And I'd like to learn more about why you haven't licensed instead. But before we go there, can you just explain for our audience who may not be familiar with what incubators and startup accelerators do?
Absolutely. So depending on the stage of where you're at, you can get different kinds of help. In fact, the Small Business Association is free. It's across the country. And if you've never tried to start a small business, the government, basically, I think it's maybe government or it's a voluntary org, will teach you how to set up a small business, give you classes for marketing and sales and all this kind of stuff. So even that alone is a great way to get yourself started. But you'll get to a point where you're like, I need to move this forward. I don't know the right people. So these incubators will sign you up. You'll be a crew of some number of students, and they'll teach you the stuff you need and help you with tools to get you to the next level in your business, where maybe you can pitch for angel investors to put some money into your project and get you a little farther. And then once you get to a certain point, maybe you've got some sales, then you can get into a larger incubator that's for first stage, and you can see about getting a different kind of funding raise. But there are these little crews all around. If you've never done any of this, I encourage you to look up Startup Weekend as an example. Google that. There might be some other brands out there, but you'll go one night, maybe you'll pitch an idea that you have, and all you've got is the idea. That's all they want you to have. And then 2 or 3 people will get with you, and you'll try to get it so far during the weekend. That's a great way to figure out whether you even have a decent idea, or you'll get on someone else's team and help them grow theirs. So Startup Weekend, then a little incubator, and then you can get more and more into accelerators as you get more mature with that.
It's so funny you bring up Startup Weekend. 7 years ago or something, it was after Shark Tank, but I was asked to be a judge at Startup Weekend in New Orleans.
Cool. Yeah.
And as a bet, someone threw down $20 next to me. Or no, it was $10 because I still have the bill. Threw it down and said, "I dare you to go do this." And I was just laughing. I said, "Okay, fine." So I went up, got online, because the way that the weekend starts, for our audience sake, you get online and everybody takes a turn, gets up on stage, does their song and pony dance, pitch for their business. And then everybody votes, and the winners who make it in end up spending the weekend collaborating with the same people who didn't win.
Yeah.
Come onto your team, you build your team, and then you actually build whatever this concept is over the course of 2 days, essentially. So I made it up. I got up there. I pitched Repudate, which was basically a plugin for all the different dating websites that you could pull from, or an API, excuse me, that you could pull from and go to this website and leave ratings and reviews for your dates.
Oh, that's terrific. That's terrific. Not only
did I make it in, and I made it up on the spot. Not only did I make it in, which is kind of shitty considering there were other people that really counted on it, and I feel bad about that part of it, but I made it in, and then I won second place. So never did anything with it. So sad. Anyway, I digress. Okay, we had a great question come in, and I also just want to mention, Wendy, thank you for comments. She said, such great info. This discussion is equally, if not more helpful than successful product talk, and I couldn't agree with you more. So Wendy also goes on to ask, could you talk a little more about the differences of Kickstarter today compared to 5 to 10 years ago?
I sure can. Kickstarter, in our case, it was like 8 years ago, 7 to 8 years ago. You still have to bring your crowd. That's the biggest problem with Kickstarter. You have to do a lot of pre-marketing, bring the people that are going to support you on day one, and then you grind for 30 days or whatever your timeline is to make it to the finish line and meet your goal. But the difference is back then, it was a lot more focused on, I need my friends and family to support me. It's sort of a friends and family support platform back then. And then hopefully you get some momentum, you get some PR, you get people who don't know you coming in, and you really get market validation on whether people who don't know you are willing to invest in your product, in your project. Back then, it could be kind of ugly. Your stuff could be ugly. It doesn't have to be beautiful, highly polished with great levels of graphic design. But these days, a lot of the existing companies use it to launch their products. And a lot of companies who've been using Kickstarter over the years to launch more and more products are getting more and more polished. So it's more of a product launch platform. You can still bring your friends and family, and you can still bring others who are interested in your product, but you have to be more polished going in. Also, back then, it didn't have the ability to do things like give add-ons, which is an additional way to generate revenue for your product, right from the get-go.
Mm.
You know, maybe you have a product, it's a core product, but you also have this other thing or two that you know you could get some value out of. Kickstarter wouldn't let you tack that stuff on. Now it does. Also, back in the day, you didn't have the ability to come in and get emails. And unless you funded, you didn't get all the emails from Kickstarter. These days, there's something called Backer Kit. You can attach that, and immediately after someone says they're going to back your project, you send them an email that says, hey, how'd you hear about us, and what's your email address? Okay, so it's a more mature platform, but what you bring to the table has to be more mature. It has to be more polished.
Yeah.
If people look at the stuff compared, you know, you're compared to your peers, and if they see your stuff is kind of low quality and janky, if you will, then they're going to go, I don't really know this person can deliver. And a lot of the sales is convincing them that you have the ability to deliver as well. So a bit more polish helps. So
More competitive.
That's right. And the advice is do some decent graphic design if you can, decent photography of your product, and a decent video. The video is the critical piece there. So, but the appeal is not so much, hey, help me make this land. It's here's what you're going to get if you help me make this land. And that's sort of the differences between the two.
Yep. And you still have to drive your own audience at the end. It's not like Shark Tank where they're bringing you the audience. In this case, you got to go get the audience to come find you.
Yeah.
It's very different. I know I say, I don't believe that if I were to audition with the same product, Treasure Chest Pets, for Shark Tank today, I don't think I would get on because the competition is so much higher. Back then, I was on season 1. They were struggling to get people. No one wanted to be on the show. No one knew what it was yet. In fact, when the producer came to me after a pitch competition, I had just won this other thing. And she said, yeah, we've got this new show. It's Mark Burnett. I'm like, no. I don't want to eat bugs for my business. Thank you. She's like, no, it's not like that. I promise. And then eventually, obviously, they got me to audition and I got on. But that would be a very different story today, I think. So.
I think you're right. But what a great piece of history to be in that first season. Like I know Tiffany Crummins and her, being on the pilot episode. I mean, you only get the first one, right? So by the time we got to pitch Shark Tank, it was already 6 years in production, and obviously at that time it was like the biggest TV show on Friday nights. I don't know what it is now, but so it was very well known. We were actually being pitched by a different company who was trying to do a competing show, and we're like, Shark Tank or this other company does it. We're going to Shark Tank. I don't even care if we get on.
Do you remember what the other show was?
No, we didn't get partnered with them. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Licensing. So Robert's offer, and I noticed, let's see here. I think it was, so Michael Flynn asked about whether or not you wished you had still gone through with the dealer, how you felt about missing out on that deal.
Yeah.
Was licensing ever an option for you?
It was. And coincidentally, Jeremy knew the guy that Herjavec was going to talk to. So it was a small world, Yeah. Yes, licensing was a great thing for the TROBO platform. Still could be. We had actually gone to shows to see what licensing was about because we hadn't done licensing before. But the way it works, we had hoped to take the product and say, okay, you license our product and put your brand on it, and you can ship with our platform. Because oftentimes in the technical space, you build a platform and you sell the platform to somebody, and then they reuse it with a white label or whatever to make their software or whatever. That's not how it works in licensing. In this case, I would buy the licensing from, like we spoke with the owners of Garfield as an example, the cartoon cat.
I did. Garfield offered me a deal with TC Pets too. That's so funny.
Right? Well, they're there, right? They're movers and shakers. So the idea is that we would have to fund and pay for the license and then put the branding on there at quality in order to ship. And we just didn't have the money for that. Honestly, we weren't at a point where we could pay for a license and then take the risk on ourselves to also build the dolls and all that. It was just too much for us.
It doesn't make sense. Yeah. No, it doesn't make sense. And generally speaking, when you have an invention that has some utilitarian value to someone, then adding a brand to it it's nice, but it shouldn't be necessary. It should be saleable on the merit of the new tech itself, right? So why not license your technology to a toy company who already has those licenses, like a Powerpuff Girl, for example?
Well, actually, we did meet with 3 major toy company players because we had, during that period, we had a gap in our leadership team, Lisa, and that was the sales guy. So we met with I can't say his name, but a big veteran from the toy space who had a network. And we ended up at Toy Fair meeting 2 of the major players. And then the third one, we went and met with them at their offices in New York. And we were pitching them on the idea of taking our platform and reskinning it for their brands. And you guys would all know their brands. They're a household name. It so happens that they had a competitor, and they were about 4 months ahead of us. We had a competitor who also pitched them, and they got to see what we were doing, but they said, well, we've got this company, and it's coming out in the fall, so no thanks. That happens. That's
Timing.
fine.
I know. It's the one
Yeah.
thing we can't do anything about timing.
You can't. It so happens their product, which was actually more advanced than ours, I got to own it was more advanced than ours. Really high price points, like $110 to $120. It came out that fall. It didn't do well, and they closed it. And those inventors went on to do other things too. Just part of business.
So even the competitor ended up failing.
Yeah. Well, failing's a tough word, right? That hurts your heart.
That product.
They got all the way to market with a major toy manufacturer and their branding, and they got out there, and I just don't think they had the sales to justify doing it the next year. But that's a pretty good level of success, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
I'll take that all day long. I mean, you always want to have the product that lasts forever, but even that's a big win for those folks. So.
Right. Well, and that's why the toy industry isn't as particular about patents, because the life cycle of toys is so short anyway, shelf life. They tend to turn over fairly quickly, although having IP on it is nice if it does end up sticking around and you iterate on it, right?
I do a trademark every time for sure, because a lot of my stuff is content based.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually did file a patent for TROBO as well. But it got an initial rejection. At that point, we knew we weren't going to be investing further, and we let
anyway in it. Yeah, I did the same thing. I filed 3 design patents and 1 utility patent on the first 3 designs, and got the 3 design patents issued. But the utility patent, after a couple of objections, we ended up giving, or did we end up issuing? Dear Lord, it's been so long. I think I blocked it out for mental pain. Like, it's just too exhausting to think back on. So,
well, and the thing is with patents, since you kind of surfaced that, at least my perspective for what it is, it's just one person's perspective. I used to work at EA Sports making video games, and their philosophy I kind of like. It's we need to have a defensive position so someone can't take our tech away from us. So when I'm looking at the money that I'm investing, I always invest in trademarks. They're super cheap and easy to do. And at least that protects, the use of the branding, which can be the most important part of your offering. And then the patent is, if I can afford it, I'm not a patent guy. I have to get a lawyer to help because it gets really in the nuance. It can be really expensive, but you have to know that you're going to be able to defend what you have with your patent. So that's a tough one because that's orders of magnitude more expensive.
Right. No, that's absolutely. If you can't enforce it or defend it, then it's only a piece of paper. Nice thing about licensing, and I have done it many times, is that the company becomes responsible for enforcing or defending it. So if you do get a patent issued, you can't defend or enforce something that you don't own, but you can put people on notice that you're about to own it, but you can't otherwise. So would you be willing to share with us your darkest day and what you learned and how you recovered?
Yes. I remember, I guess there were two tough moments for me, but the darkest day was actually when I went to the back porch, and it oddly enough was raining. How poetic! But, I learned that not only this is just like 2 or 3 weeks after we had met with Robert, and we weren't going to close that deal with him. We were also trying to close a phase 2 small business innovation grant. We got a phase 1, which gave us a decent chunk of money to fund the company. The phase 2 would have been like $750,000. So we were really looking for cash to move on to the next level.
Right.
And we had been beat by some really lovely ladies out of Atlanta who had slightly different plush toy product, but we're in the same cohort of like 10 companies trying to get this phase 2 small business innovation grant. And they got it and we didn't. And it was sort of like, a major punch from not landing with Robert, and then this other punch not landing with the grant.
Yeah.
So I went on the back porch. I just kind of sat and dealt with the fact that the next major amount of cash wasn't going to come without me and Jeremy investing further. We'd already put a pretty big chunk of change into TROBO, so that was hard because you have these major moments. You're like, if I could just make that hit, we can extend our runway for another year or whatever. And that was tough.
Yeah. For me, it was when I had been doing it for a year and a half, and like you, been putting all of our money. I'd even liquidated all of our real estate, so we only had the home that I had, and had started going into debt now, in fact, at this point. And I had a handful, of friends and family who had made, $5,000, the 3 F's type investors. For those who don't know, friends, family, and fools, who give you the money up front, the angels who help you in the beginning. And so, another like 25,000, I think I had raised, but I'd put over 150,000 in at that point and wasn't earning any income for about a year and a half.
Which is
so, I had the runway, but I didn't anymore. And this was when 2010, when 2008, the economy looked very similar to what it does right now. And by 2010, it caught up to me, and we were in foreclosure, like most people. And I was doing the Obama program at the time to try and get out of it. And I had spent 6 months doing all of the paperwork. And then all of a sudden, I come home and I call them. I'm like, why is this not happening? It was supposed to happen by today. This was supposed to be free and clear. And they said they had left 3 messages 2 or 3 days before that it was a deadline that day. And if I didn't have something into them by that day, it was all over and I couldn't get it. My kids didn't give me the message. And because I was so stressed out about all this other stuff, I blew up on them. That was rough, because now all of a sudden it wasn't just impacting this world. It was making its way down into this part of my life. And it was devastating. And I still apologize to this day for my kid. I'm like, I'm really sorry I was such a bitch about that. They're grown. I have grandkids now and they're fine. They're well adjusted. They had a little therapy, but they're okay.
But you're right. It can seep in, and
it overflows into the rest of your life if you don't stay on top of it.
We had, during that time, of course, we had some lovely mentors in the toy space, and there was one gentleman who had a $40 million toy business, absolutely successful. And while we were going through this process, he got his company taken away from him. He also had his patent stolen by a bigger company out of China, but he had the locks changed on his building, and he couldn't go back in. They had removed it. The investment company took over his company. And that was a big wake-up moment for me and Jeremy. We're like, wow, this toy industry is really heavy. And if you don't really protect yourself, someone will take it from you, including your own investors. So that caused us to have pause about going to the next level and being desperate to get to the next level. So even if you're really successful, it can still fail.
The toy business is notorious for it. And you're working on a new product, which I want to talk about. But Derek has a question here.
Okay.
Derek's asking, are the benefits or drawbacks of doing crowdfunding as opposed to just doing pre-sales on your website and promoting on various social media platforms?
Yes.
Are there any?
Yes, absolutely. There are benefits and drawbacks. Let me talk about a drawback first, because it still worries me today. It was really worried with the TROBO, and honestly, I think it introduced some early competition for TROBO because you move kind of slow. If you're on Kickstarter or crowdfunding tools in general, you're usually out way sooner public with everything you're doing before you ever deliver. It could be a year out. For me and Jeremy, it took a year to deliver TROBO. That means if you've got something that's really novel and powerful and honestly can be easily replicated, competition can come in and compete against you before you can even get to market if they're big enough. And we had that happen. There's a company called Cloud Pets that came in, got into Walmart the season before we shipped, and that hurt. So there are risks in being really public with what you're doing up front. The trade-off, however, is you can get funding up front. And so I'm going to go Kickstarter again. I think it's a great platform, love the community, and you can get a lot more than your friends and family. You can also get people who want to support Kickstarters, and you can get people in your target audience to really see whether or not you're going to validate your product. Going with crowdfunding versus your own site, absolutely go with a Kickstarter or an Indiegogo. I don't know so much about GoFundMe, but those two platforms, The reason why is because they have ways of also broadcasting your product to their target audiences who are already self-selected into a pool of people who want to support Kickstarts. So you're not having to convince strangers to buy your product before it's ready. People come to Kickstarter know they're getting in on something before it's ready, and they're willing to take that risk with you. You're dealing with early adopters. And oftentimes, you get support from people who may not necessarily love your product, but love the idea of kickstarting inventors. I do it. I usually support a Kickstarter about once a week because I love the community. I want to contribute and give back. And so, yes, Derek, you will get a lot of benefit for the trade-off of about 8% on your retail price. Whatever you're charging on Kickstarter, they're going to take 5% for Kickstarter and 3% for credit card sales, something like that. It comes out to about 8%. So you have to know that when you go in, you're taking a hit on your top line, but it generally speaking will be worth it if you can get to a certain level, and then you'll see them advertising for you. It's easier, it's more known. So there's a lot of reasons to get in there on a platform like that as opposed to doing everything yourself. Chris, you don't also have a template for a website to handle that kind of sale.
Yeah, it's all plug and play for them.
It is, yeah.
But to your point earlier about one of the biggest lessons being to validate early whether or not there's enough people with this pain, right? A big enough market for the problem that you're solving, your solution. Maybe testing it both ways, right?
You could.
It seems to me like if you're going to do one, why not do the other also?
Here's what I do, and this is pretty standard advice for Kickstarters. Right now I'm doing this, and I'm struggling, to be honest with you. I am running, I did it mainly in May and part of June. I've stopped now because I need to understand what I'm doing wrong. But what they say to do, and I can give you a couple of book recommendations on this. There's one called Crowdfunding Book, which I really like, Crowdfunding Book. There's also a guy named Jamie Stegmaier who you should follow if you want to do anything with Kickstarter. So what the effort is you go into Facebook or other types of advertising platforms that you're familiar with. You want to try, maybe you're a TikTok person. I'm not yet. And you drive traffic to a landing page on your site. And you do different landing pages so that you can test different kinds of ads. Like my next product is a book, a treasure hunting game, a family tradition, and there's also a candy craft. So I have lots of ways that I can position the product to target different people. I know from now 3 years of user trials at Christmas time, because it's a Christmas product, the game is going to it will be how I spearhead my marketing. I also threw myself a bone and I did game-oriented and a book-oriented marketing effort on Facebook, 2 different ads, and I drove them to my landing page. And just orders of magnitude bigger are the people who respond to the game ad versus the book ad. So you can use your own stuff to build up your email list on your personal platform. So if you have a website, I think it was with derekjames.com or whatever your product is, there you land them. And then if you can convert them by getting them on an email list, you grow that email list. And then when you go to Kickstart, you advertise to the email list, hey, I'm on Kickstarter, go fund me. And that's how you use both your own tools as well as Kickstarter to drive sales.
That's awesome. Great explanation. And for anyone who may be listening, the Kickstarter or any of the crowdfunding, crowdsourcing type platforms don't make sense for you if you intend to invent to license as opposed to invent to venture. It's going to be a whole lot of extra work and risky because any Kickstarter, right? What would you say you need to be prepared to spend if you're going to do a good Indiegogo or Kickstarter type campaign, Chris?
I'm probably going to be around 20,000 under walking in the door.
That's what I hear. 20 grand seems to be that magic number from every single person I ask.
Yeah. But honestly, speaking with Hamza from, he's been on Shark Tank twice now. What is the one that he's done? The little Christmas anchors, for example, if you want to look up Christmas anchors. He and I were talking, and he's like, you need to drop 15,000 on advertising just to get into Kickstarter if you want to really blow it up. Now, he has like $100,000, $200,000 Kickstarters. So I got to show him some respect. I don't know that I'm going to land that Kickstarter out of the gate.
Yeah, he's turned it into a machine.
He knows what he's doing. Yeah, he's a marketing machine.
Yeah. Once you figure it out. But if you're licensing, you don't need to raise any money because theoretically you can't show it until you're patent pending anyway. So if you're raising money to get patent pending, then that's not that's backwards. And then once you're patent pending, really, it's just a matter of a simple proof of concept and pursuing the companies. There's not a lot of cost associated that you would need to invest that much money to pay for. If you've got the money, just do it yourself and keep going with the licensing. Catch 22. So you're working on a new product now.
I am. Before we talk about that, Lisa, if you don't mind.
No.
For those of you who are interested.
Are you kidding? You can run the show. And I'll just remind our audience, if you have any questions, just drop them in the comments here, folks, and we'll take them in the order that they come in.
So I mentioned to you in our pre-chat, there's some books I can recommend, because probably most of the folks are on here are lifelong learners and they want little tidbits here and there. So I have some recommendations for you. First off, if you've never done this, if you're trying to figure out how to not to be just an inventor, but also a business, an entrepreneur, you might look at the E-Myth Revisited. Okay, this is a classics by Michael Gerber, E-Myth Revisited. I love this book, and anyone who wants to go into business for themselves, regardless of whether they're an inventor, really should read this. In fact, my wife is also an entrepreneur, and she's a doctor, and she deals with a lot of the challenges in there. If you're more of a technical type, Crossing the Chasm, it's a classic business tome, but it really teaches you about your market segmentation and who you're selling to on Kickstarter versus who you're selling to on Amazon. So Crossing the Chasm by Jeffrey Moore is excellent. And I'm genuinely not trying to drive my own book sales, Lisa, but
you should. You're doing us a favor. We should definitely get the word out about you.
This book is called Little Robot, Big Dreams. It's the highs, lows, and lessons learned of a Shark Tank startup. But what this is, and it's my book, okay? If you go to chrisharden.com, you can find it, or if you just look up Little Robot, Big Dreams. But it talks about our journey, because we hit like all the major beats. We did Startup Weekend, we did Incubation, we did Toy Fair, Kickstarter, patents. We pitched Y Combinator, got a small business innovation research grant. We went through production challenges, shipping challenges, Shark Tank. So anyhow, if you're looking for more of a story, this will show you how we went through and the lessons learned at each stage.
That's awesome. That was chrisharden.com, E-Myth Revisited. I own that one. And then Crossing the Chasm. I have not heard of that one. So thank you for sharing. And I'm a voracious learner. So I'm always looking for new things. Yeah. So chrisharden.com. I popped that up for you folks. And then Candy Cane Wormhole.
Yeah. So this is the new product I'm working on. So I've been working on it for 3 years. As we discussed, I have an industrial design background in addition to engineering. And what that really means is you do a lot of user trials up front to make sure you're building something people want and they're willing to pay for and all that kind of thing. It's called design thinking. So if you guys want another reference, look up design thinking. It's a great thing to have in your inventing toolkit because it makes you get out of your own self and into the minds of your customers that you want to serve. Design thinking. Anyhow, Stanley and the Candy Cane Wormhole, I'll show a cover of the book, is at its core, it's a children's Christmas tradition. So it's a children's book. It's targeted to 3 plus. And I'm holding up a little book here, but it's basically going to launch as a part of a package that has a book, a candy craft where you make these little candy cane wormholes out of marshmallows and candy canes and chocolate. And it also has a game associated with it. It's a treasure hunt deck. And I'm holding up a little pack of treasure hunt cards that drive 7 values as a parent. I have 2 kids. And we want to drive things like bravery, problem solving, being kind and thankful, those kinds of things. So the whole kit follows a little squirrel that discovers wormholes and how he can use them to deliver gifts for Christmas for Santa. But it doesn't go well. And so, it gets out of hand. And in the end, he learns how he can serve Santa and deliver gifts. Anyhow, the game is also about finding a lost gift in your home. So I'll be launching it sometime in September. And right now I'm, basically learning how to do the ads so that I can get the right kind of people to the product.
Nice. So once again, you're venturing off with a children's product that's educational in nature. This time it sounds a little bit more like it's character and moral building as opposed to technology and STEM building, right? That's awesome. That must be your calling.
It is. I love kids, and one day I want to do a children's series on teaching better financial skills as young as possible. But one day I have yet to invent the right product idea just yet.
I want to learn what you're going to do differently this time from what you did in the past. with TROBO. But before we do, real quick, Mark is asking, is design thinking a book? I mean, there are plenty of books about design thinking, but essentially more it's a process, it's a philosophy. So if you just Google design thinking, it explains, it's the thing that we talk about all the time in the Invention Accelerator, an empathetic approach, so that when you are designing, making, forming your product with whatever its features and functions are going to be, it takes into consideration not just your needs, but the needs of all the people who have that pain.
That's right.
Design thinking with your consumer.
It's a concept. And to your point, startup weekend, Lisa.
Yeah.
The first thing you're forced to do, which is so hard and scary, it's the hardest part. You take your idea, as best you can describe it, out to the mall, and you ask people, hey, would you pay for this? And what would you pay? So scary. So
yeah.
That right there is already getting you out of yourself, your comfort zone, and asking people whether they would even want your product to begin with before you've ever built anything. That pays in spades. It really does pay in spades.
It's so good. You're right. That was the first step on Startup Weekend. And in our case, what we had our team do was go out to, because it was New Orleans, and there's always a festival. Sure enough, there was a music festival going on. So we had them standing at the front gate and just asking people, are you on any dating apps? Have you been have you had success? Would you mind sharing what was your experience? And if you could tell others, would you want to, about that experience? And that's how we got the insights that we needed about how to design now that software to deliver that solution.
That's terrific.
It's so silly. I mean, I really thought we could do something with it, but at the time I was actually still recovering from that 1-2 punch that I got from losing everything with Shark Tank. And I just didn't want to do any more ventures, which is why I'm very curious to know what you learned that you're going to apply now going forward and do differently. So tell me about that.
I think one of the biggest things I learned is a classic entrepreneurial mistake. And if you are going to accelerate your efforts with a teammate, write down the terms of separation with your teammate as soon as possible. Know what kind of percent of the pie you want to have, and define with each of you. Sit down, put your big girl and big boy pants on, and say, look, we're going to go into an arrangement here, but what happens if we really do leave? If I really need to go because I'm out of my personal finance runway. It's the prenup, right? Put those down into some sort of separation agreement. It's uncomfortable. It is awkward. But I found myself, and Jeremy did too, in a situation where we were trying to close down TROBO. I wanted to keep moving with it, and I couldn't. And and Jeremy wasn't comfortable with any sort of earnout. I love Jeremy. He's a lifelong friend. But essentially what happened is we were 50-50, and I couldn't take it forward. And even today, I don't have control over TROBO to do something. And I'll have to convince Jeremy if I ever want to do something with it. But we had people who tried to buy TROBO and couldn't sell it. So it's a classic entrepreneurial mistake. It comes up a lot in business books. But if you go and get a partner, do yourself the favor of having that awkward conversation where if you got to go or I got to go, how do I get the equity back, or how do you get the equity back, and what you take with you? And talk about responsibilities. Who's going to do what, so that I'm delivering and I'm accountable for earning that equity. If you avoid that conversation, you're going to find yourself in the same situation where you don't know how to get back your company if you want to move forward.
So you mentioned earlier teams and the importance of putting together teams. And this is true for you with your co-founders. Mm-hmm. Not knowing what to anticipate, having a good lawyer help you draft that and understand what things you should be considering at the time of putting your union together. Mm-hmm. Considering if it goes sideways right up front is really important.
It is. And this also goes back to solving a big enough problem, right? If you want to have a small business, mom and pop, it's just you, sole contributorship, great. You don't have to deal with that. But if you think you're going to need other domains and you don't want to wait to learn it on your own, and part with getting a good partner is being bold enough to say, okay, we also need to get these terms in place.
You know what also is really interesting about you saying that, Chris, is when most people will take a lesson and say, screw that, I'm never doing that again. Yeah. Instead of you saying, that didn't work and it hurt me and that was painful and costly, I'm never having a partner again. You took the learning from that and said, here's how I'm going to do partnerships better in the future. And that is at the core, folks. If you miss that, please pause and think about that. At the core, that is really the internal formula of a successful person. It's the person who knows how to take the learning and turn it into something they can move forward with, not resist the rest of their life. Oh, I learned that's bad, so I'm going to get better, not bitter, right?
It's really true. And every time, this is like Stanley and the Candy Cane Wormhole, this is going to be my 6th venture. And I've learned something along the way, sometimes about marketing, sometimes about people, sometimes about technical and just the scaling and all that.
Right.
And you learn a lot more than just one major lesson, right? I know we're boiling this down to an hour, but
which we're at there.
If you don't get what you want, you get education. So take it and make yourself better. There's this lovely little museum exhibit somewhere in France, I want to say. It's a circular set of inclined stairs, and they're all attached. And the actors are marching up the stairs, like 3 or 4 actors marching up the stairs, and they fall down to the middle for trampoline, and then they bounce back up on the same step, and then they keep going. Eventually, they all get off. But it's just a visual representation of, hey, you're going to fall, but get back on the stairs and keep climbing.
So good. I mean, it's the perfect way. I cannot believe I just looked up and realized it's been an hour. I had no idea. It just flew by. This was so mumuch fun. I do want to remind everyone, I didn't mention it earlier. I had it up on screen. So for those who are only listening today, if you go to facebook.com/candycaneworm, WORM, if you don't understand how I'm saying it, hole, HOLE, wormhole. You can learn more about the product, the new package solution, whatever you want to call it, for that Chris mentioned earlier. And what's the, obviously Candy Cane Wormhole, but what's the product called? That's the title.
It's actually called Candy Cane Wormhole.
Yeah, but would you say it's a book? It's education, a game.
It's the Christmas treasure hunt game is the
Christmas treasure hunt game. Okay, go check that out, folks. It's totally worth it. And always be learning. Perfect way to end our program today. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Chris, so much for being here in spite of your very challenging schedule this morning. I am afraid it's time to wrap up. But if you've enjoyed our show today, please help us get the word out by sharing this show with your network and following InvenTank on iHeart, Amazon, or Pandora. And when you subscribe to any of those podcasts, you also help me get more great guests like Chris today. So you're helping everybody out at the same time that you get to enjoy the program. Thank you for being here. Thank you again, Chris. Stick with me for just one moment. You all have a great rest of your